Okay, yes, I'm Tor Lillqvist. I work for SUSE. I live and work in Helsinki. And for about a year or so, I have been working on this cross-compilation thing to Android. And this talk I will talk about some experiences of compiling this code base for Android. Yeah, and the basic premises for the talk is that if you have some application code base that you want to port to Android, and firstly, does this make sense? Well, if the main thing in the application is the business logic, not the user interface. Because if an application is mostly user interface, you will have to rewrite it anyway. Because the UI layer has to be in Java in Android. But non-interactive code can be in C or C++ just fine. The toolchain used is called NDK. You can download it from Google's website. Its current version is 8B, and it includes GCC 4.6 and binutils. And the linker is Gold. Well, they also have the other linker, but Gold is much faster. And in this talk, I will not talk about OpenGLS stuff, because that's completely different. And I haven't really played with that. The most important thing to know is that Android is really not desktop Linux. The kernel is Linux, but otherwise it's something else. This is a common misconception when you start doing work, that people try to do things that are possible on desktop Linux, but they are not possible on Android then. And many people think you can make pure native apps, but that's not true. Also, the number of libraries available is quite limited. But how much Linux is there then in Android? Well, the kernel is Linux. Besides that, there is not that much in common with desktop Linux. And Linux is, of course, you can say it's the kernel or is it the whole environment. So it depends on what you mean with that. The executable format is the same as on normal Linux. But the feature support for various ELF features is quite limited. And the C library is not glibc, it's an other library with a different license. It's called Bionic. And it's has some features removed that you then have to do in different ways. Am I, by the way, talking slowly enough, or do I need to slow down? Okay, fine. One of the common misconceptions is that by using NDK, you can write code that is more or less like for other Linuxes. That's not really the case. It's not some kind of portability layer. And if you can't do something with Java in Android, you can't really do it with C code either. And if you want to use some library and you know that Android itself uses that library, you can't use it, because if there is no header for it, you can't just guess that I know they use this lib something, and I know what its header looks like, and try to guess that it must comply to that API. So you should not be afraid of using Java also, if you will need it for your UI and possibly for other things. this pure native thing, there are actually no pure native apps in Android. Even if the code that you write is only C++ or C, it still has a Java virtual machine running inside it, inside the process. And actually, of course, it's not like normal Java. It's a VM called Dalvik that doesn't use bytecode but uses 16-bit 16-bit codes, and is register based and not stack based or something like that. And also, people often think that if you code in C, you can get around various restrictions that are there for Java apps, but that's not really the case. Of course, you can, if you do some dirty tricks, you can then hack around things, but that you are not supposed to do that, and that's not something I recommend. And I don't know how to do it. Yeah, but these libraries that are missing, for instance, stuff like libjpeg or libxml or those, they are not present in the NDK. Android probably uses them itself, and it might even be quite clear that it uses them because you see that the library is there, but as there is no header for it, you can't just go guessing that it will always be there and you can use it. You should not try to be too clever and do stuff that doesn't work necessarily in the future or on other vendors' Android implementations. You see on this Android NDK mailing list people asking questions now and then that I see this library in the system lib location and I want to use it. How do I know what API it provides exactly, and so on? And they are on the wrong track then. You have to compile these yourself if you want to use them and include them in your app. And if you want to do something that is already available, the functionality in the Java API that Android offers, it doesn't really make sense to try to do the same using C. Because Java is always there anyway and available, and you can either then call the Java functions through JNI or have your UI layer call it in a more easy way and then provide the results to your C layer and something like that. But of course, you should not go and translate your non-UI code if you have lots of code. Not just translating that manually into Java just because you think it would be better. That's not necessary. And of course, for new Android programmers that write code from scratch and Java code, they probably use Eclipse. But if you are more used to Emacs or VI or whatever, you can use them to write your C code or your Java code. And then when you want to build your app, they use, or the recommended tool is probably Ant. So you look at some of the examples that come with the SDK or NDK and just modify it and run Ant to construct an app. You can, of course, wrap this Ant call into a makefile and so on. The process environment that an app runs in, it's quite different from on a normal Linux machine. First of all, each app gets a separate UID when you install it. And the file system is not that like a Linux file system. There is no temp and no home and etc. And the system libraries are in system/lib and things like that. And if you want to, as you usually need to know, where to store some files, permanently or cached files or things like that. There is Java API to get that information. And one fun thing is that's standard output and error. They don't show up anywhere. So you need to use this log print function to get logging output. But if your code has like thousands of printfs already, you can do some pipe and dump things to and start a thread to catch these and put them into the log instead. That's what we do in LibreOffice. And this is, by the way, something that works differently in the Android emulator and on a real device, which was a fun thing to notice when you started running your code on a real device instead. About the process lifecycle, it's not Unix-like. There is no main that your code starts at. There are these concepts like activity, intent, fragment, and as I haven't myself yet written so much of the UI level code, I haven't learned them all yet by heart what they actually mean. How all this app starting works is that there is a so-called Zygote process that is running that has the Dalvik virtual machine and already loaded, and all the basic Java libraries loaded. And when you start an application, it then forks and starts loading your Java code. It does not execute a new program. And if it's an app that consists of mainly native code, this Java code is then actually provided by the system, and it loads your native library. And you should, one thing that is very different is that you should never exit your process. It's supposed to be always there, except when the operating system decides to kill it. And you should never fork a new process. That's not enforced, I think, at the moment, but I'm sure it will be at some point. Yeah. Currently, you can do things that you shouldn't be doing, but I'm sure this will be improved, and then you will have to do as they say and not try to be clever. And if you think that you need special powers and that you need to be root on your device and so on, then you are probably doing something that you shouldn't be writing an app for, but you should instead be doing an own Android implementation. Yeah, well, that's not really fun there. And if you think that writing Android apps is too restrictive, then you don't have to do it. Then you do something else. And of course, iOS is even more restrictive. There are all kinds of various embedded devices that you can write code for if you don't like Android, and of course the choice is that if you do use them, it's not necessarily going to be used by so many people, but it can still be fun, and why not? And I think that was my last slide, actually. Yeah, so this probably was quite 50 minutes only. Yeah, quite quick. So any questions? If not, I'll say thank you for not falling asleep and not leaving everybody, and thanks.